The medical bay of the Sanctuary of Light hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing vital signs and tissue scans in brilliant blue light. Robotic arms moved with perfect precision, their plasma scalpels cutting through flesh without leaving a single drop of blood on the operating table. Dr. Velrus stood at the center of it all, his three-fingered hands dancing across control panels as he directed the automated systems with the confidence of someone who had never known failure. The Thalok surgeon had performed thousands of operations across dozens of species. His medical bay was equipped with technology that could regrow organs, rebuild shattered bones, and cure diseases that would have killed patients centuries ago. When the distress signal came from the damaged colony ship, he prepared his systems without concern. This was routine. The machines would handle everything. Then the survivors arrived and routine became chaos. The airlock doors hissed open and stretchers began flooding into the medical bay. There were Zinthari with their blue skin torn by shrapnel, Korvax bleeding their copper-based blood across the white floors, and several species Dr. Velrus had never treated before. His automated systems immediately began scanning, categorizing, and assigning treatment protocols. Everything was under control. Among the crowd of injured, a human in a torn gray uniform moved with purpose. Corporal Park Hyun-woo had the compact build common to his species, with dark hair matted with sweat and dust covering his face. His uniform bore the insignia of Earth's Expeditionary Medical Corps, though most of his equipment had been lost in the evacuation. He carried only a small pack and moved from stretcher to stretcher, checking patients with quick, practiced efficiency. Dr. Velrus noticed him immediately. The human was touching the patients, placing his fingers on their necks and wrists, leaning close to listen to their breathing. How primitive. The diagnostic beds would provide far more accurate readings than any biological sensor could achieve. The Thalok surgeon made a note to remind the human that proper procedure required waiting for the automated systems to complete their scans. But there was no time for corrections now. The casualties kept coming. A young human woman was brought in on an emergency stretcher. Lee Dane, according to her identification tag. She was an engineer from the colony ship, barely 20 years old. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandages wrapped around her chest. The automated stretcher immediately flagged her as critical and moved her to the primary surgical station. Hyun-woo followed the stretcher, his expression tight with worry. He had stabilized her on the colony ship, but she needed real surgery now. Things he couldn't do with the limited supplies in his medic pack. Dr. Velrus approached the surgical station, his confidence absolute. The holographic display showed detailed scans of the human's internal injuries. Collapsed lung, internal bleeding, 3 fractured ribs. Serious but manageable. With the proper application of tissue regeneration and nano-repair systems, he activated the plasma scalpel and prepared to begin. The machine emitted a harsh warning tone. Dr. Velrus frowned and checked the display. The system couldn't calibrate to human tissue. The readings were inconsistent, the biological markers outside of standard parameters. He adjusted the settings, pulling up the human medical database that had been transmitted from Earth years ago. The machine recalculated and tried again. Another warning tone. Calibration failure. Dane's breathing became more labored. Her oxygen levels were dropping. The automated system began suggesting alternative approaches, but each one required successful calibration. First, Dr. Velrus felt something unfamiliar creeping into his mind, uncertainty. The machines that had never failed him before were failing him now. He tried a different tool. The nanosurgical drones launched from their housing, their microscopic sensors probing toward the patient. They hovered for a moment, then retreated. Biological incompatibility detected. The drones couldn't risk damaging tissue they couldn't properly identify. Dane's lips were turning blue. Her vital signs began dropping across all displays. Dr. Velrus stood frozen. His hands moved across the control panels, trying protocol after protocol, but nothing worked. The machines designed to save lives couldn't understand the life in front of them. His medical training had taught him to trust the systems, to follow the automated procedures. But what happened when the systems had no answers? Doctor? The voice was quiet but firm. Hyun-woo stood on the other side of the surgical station, his eyes locked on Dane's failing vitals. She's dying. The calibration systems are malfunctioning, Dr. Velrus said, hearing the defensive edge in his own voice. The biological markers aren't matching the database. I cannot proceed without proper algorithmic guidance. Then step aside. Hyunwoo moved around the table, his hands already opening his medical pack. He pulled out items that made Dr. Velrus recoil. A bottle of clear liquid, strips of cloth, and a piece of metal that had been sharpened to a crude edge. What are you doing? Dr. Velrus demanded. You cannot use such primitive tools in a sterile environment. The risk of infection alone. She'll be dead from bleeding before infection becomes a problem. Hyunwoo poured the clear liquid over his hands, the sharp smell of alcohol filling the air. He poured more over the metal blade, then over Dane's chest where the bandages had been cut away. Does anyone have a sharp knife? He asked, looking around at the other medical staff who had gathered to watch. No one answered. They stared at him as if he had lost his mind. This will have to do then. Hyunwoo positioned the sharpened metal carefully. He placed his other hand on Dane's chest, feeling the rise and fall of her struggling breaths, counting the weak beats of her heart through the skin. No machines told him where to cut. No holographic guides showed him the safe paths through tissue. He relied on knowledge that had been passed down through generations of human medics, learned in wars and disasters when there were no machines to save them. He cut. Dr. Velrus watched in horror as blood welled up around the primitive blade. But Hyunwoo's hands moved with steady confidence, widening the incision just enough to access the damaged area. He used the cloth strips to absorb blood, working quickly but carefully. His fingers probed into the wound, feeling for the source of internal bleeding that the machines couldn't find. There, he muttered. A small fragment of metal had pierced an artery. He pressed his fingers around it, controlling the bleeding with pressure alone. With his other hand, he carefully extracted the fragment. Blood flowed, but he was ready with the cloth, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. Around him, alien medical staff stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. This wasn't medicine as they knew it. This was barbaric, primitive, dangerous. But Dane's oxygen levels began to rise. Her breathing steadied. The blue color faded from her lips. Hyunwoo worked for 20 minutes using nothing but his hands, his crude tools, and his training. When he finally stepped back, Dane was stable. Not healed, but alive and stable. The machines could take over the recovery now that the immediate crisis had passed. He looked at Dr. Velrus, his expression calm but tired. She'll need your regeneration systems for proper healing, but she'll live long enough to get there now. Dr. Velrus couldn't find words. The human had just performed surgery with tools that belonged in a museum. And it had worked. The question that stunned everyone still echoed in the medical bay. Does anyone have a sharp knife? In a room full of the galaxy's most advanced medical technology, those words had saved a life. The medical bay fell into an uncomfortable silence after Hyunwoo finished working on Dain. The other patients had been stabilized by the automated systems, their treatments proceeding normally now that the initial chaos had passed. But all eyes kept drifting back to the human medic who stood washing blood from his hands in a basic sink. Using soap and water like some ancient practitioner from a forgotten era, Dr. Karras, a young Thalox physician who had been observing from the side, couldn't look away. She had graduated top of her class at the Galactic Medical Academy. She had studied under the greatest surgeons in known space, but she had never seen anything like what the human had just done. It fascinated her. It terrified her. It challenged everything she thought she knew about medicine. She approached Hyunwoo as he dried his hands. How did you know where to cut? You had no tissue scanner, no depth readings, no cellular analysis. You just cut. Hyunwoo glanced at her, then back at Dane, who was now resting comfortably under the care of the automated recovery systems. I felt where the ribs were. I listened to her breathing to know which lung was collapsed. I saw where the blood was pooling under her skin. The body tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. But that's impossible, Dr. Karras insisted. Biological sensors are imprecise. Visual assessment has too much margin for error. You could have cut into a major blood vessel. You could have punctured the heart. I could have let her die while waiting for your machines to figure out what was wrong. Hyunwoo's voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. Look, I understand your technology is incredible. I'm not saying it isn't. But where I come from, we learned to save lives before we had any of those things, and we still train for when they fail. Dr. Velrus appeared beside them, his expression difficult to read. The Thalok's emotional range didn't translate well to human understanding, but his body language spoke of distress. "Corporal Park, what you did was extremely dangerous. If word gets out that we allowed primitive surgical techniques in a modern medical facility, the Galactic Health Authority will what?" Captain Cho Minho stepped into the medical bay, his uniform torn but his bearing still military straight. He had been coordinating with the ship's command staff, getting his surviving crew settled. "Complain that one of my people saved a life when your machines failed?" Dr. Velrus's head tilted in what might have been offense. The machines did not fail. They simply lacked proper calibration data for human biology. Given time, we would have... She didn't have time. Minho crossed his arms. "I watched the vital monitors from the observation window. Another 2 minutes and she would have been beyond saving." Corporal Park did what needed to be done. With a sharpened piece of scrap metal, Dr. Velrus's voice rose slightly. "No sterilization field, no molecular bonding, no tissue regeneration to ensure proper healing. The risk of complications is lower than the risk of death." Hyunwoo spoke quietly, but both officers turned to look at him. "I've done hundreds of field surgeries, sir. Some with proper equipment, most without. You learn to work with what you have. You learn that a clean knife and steady hands can save someone just as surely as a plasma scalpel. Sometimes more surely because a knife doesn't need calibration." Dr. Karras studied the human medic with intense focus. "Teach me." Everyone stared at her. "Teach me how you did that," she repeated. "How you assessed the patient without instruments. How you knew where to cut. How you controlled bleeding with just pressure. How you worked without guidance systems." Dr. Velrus made a sound that might have been alarm. "Dr. Karras, this is highly irregular. We have established protocols. The Academy does not teach such methods because they are outdated and dangerous. They're outdated until the new methods fail," she replied. "What happens the next time we encounter a species our systems can't calibrate for? What happens if we face an electromagnetic event that disables our technology? What happens when we're in a situation where we can't rely on our machines?" She looked at Hyunwoo. "Your species became spacefaring only recently. You must have been performing medicine without this technology until very recently in your history. You still remember how?" Hyunwoo nodded slowly. "Earth achieved space travel about 100 years ago, but humans have been practicing medicine for thousands of years before that. We had to learn how to save each other with nothing but our hands and whatever tools we could make. That knowledge doesn't just disappear because we get better technology. We keep teaching it because we know technology can fail." Dr. Velrus began to object, but Captain Minho held up a hand. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern about protocols. But I've seen combat. I've seen ships damaged, power systems fail, supply lines cut. The soldiers who survive are the ones who can adapt and improvise. If my medic has knowledge that could help your staff handle emergencies when systems fail, it would be foolish not to learn from him." The Thalok surgeon's shoulders sagged slightly. He was outnumbered and he knew it. "Very well. But any training must be conducted in a separate area. I will not have experimental procedures disrupting the main medical bay. And you must document everything for review by the health authority." "Agreed." Hyunwoo turned to Dr. Karras. "When do you want to start?" "Now." She gestured toward a side room used for medical education. "Show me everything." Over the next several hours, Hyunwoo introduced Dr. Karras to concepts that seemed absurdly primitive to someone raised on automated medicine. He showed her how to check a pulse by pressing fingers against an artery, counting the beats to assess heart rate and rhythm. He explained how to evaluate breathing by watching the chest rise and fall, listening to the sound of air moving through lungs. He demonstrated how to check pupil response with nothing but a small light, how to assess blood loss by looking at skin color, how to feel for broken bones through gentle palpation. Dr. Karras struggled with every concept. Her species had different finger configurations than humans, making it harder to find pulses. Her hearing operated on a different frequency range, making breath sounds harder to detect, but she persisted, fascinated by the underlying principles. "You trust your biological senses more than instruments," she observed, practicing pulse-taking on a willing Zenthari crew member. "Why? Instruments are more accurate." "Instruments tell you what they're programmed to look for," Hyunwoo explained. "Sometimes the most important thing is what they're not looking for. Sometimes you need to make judgment calls based on incomplete information. An experienced medic can look at a patient and know something is wrong, even if all the instruments say everything is fine. We call it intuition, but it's really just pattern recognition built from experience. He pulled out a medical training dummy from his pack, one of the few pieces of equipment he had salvaged. It was a simple thing compared to the holographic training systems the aliens used, but it served its purpose. He showed Dr. Karras how to perform basic sutures, using thread and a curved needle to close wounds. Her hands shook at first, unused to working without robotic assistance. "This is so imprecise," she muttered, watching her stitches create an uneven line across the dummy's synthetic skin. The tissue bonding laser would create a perfect seal. "Perfect seals break under stress," Hyunwoo said. "Stitches flex. They hold tissue together while allowing for swelling and movement. They're not pretty, but they work." Other crew members began gathering at the door, curious about what was happening in the training room. Word spread quickly on a ship. The human was teaching medicine like it was practiced in ancient times. Some came to mock. Others came to watch with genuine interest. Dr. Velrus observed from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, but he didn't leave either. By the end of the session, Dr. Karras had learned the basics of manual patient assessment and crude wound closure. She looked exhausted, her hands cramping from the unfamiliar work, but her eyes shone with something that looked like excitement. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked. "There's so much more to learn," Hyunwoo smiled. "There's always more to learn. Medicine isn't something you master and finish. It's something you practice and improve at every day, with or without fancy technology." As the group dispersed, Captain Minho pulled Hyunwoo aside. "You made an impression today. The aliens are talking. Some think you're a miracle worker. Others think you're a dangerous primitive who got lucky. What do you think, sir?" Minho looked toward the main medical bay where Diane was sleeping peacefully. "I think you saved one of my crew when no one else could. That's all that matters to me." But both men knew the situation was more complicated than that. The medical establishment wouldn't accept what Hyunwoo had done without resistance. Advanced civilizations didn't like being shown up by primitive methods. Pride was universal, even among aliens. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences. The question was what form they would take. In the medical bay, Dr. Velrus filed his report. Recommendation: Corporal Park Hyunwoo should be barred from the medical facility for unsafe practices that violated every established protocol. But in the training room, Dr. Karras practiced taking pulses late into the night, determined to master this strange new skill. The divide between old and new medicine had been drawn. Soon everyone would have to choose a side. The attack came without warning. One moment, the Sanctuary of Light was cruising through a quiet sector, its crew settling into routine after the chaos of the rescue operation. The next moment, alarms screamed through every corridor as 3 raider ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in their path. Captain Minho was on the bridge when the first shots hit. He watched the tactical display as the raiders moved with practiced precision, targeting specific systems rather than trying to destroy the ship. They wanted to disable, not kill. That meant they planned to board and take whatever they could carry. The ship's shields held against the initial barrage, but then one of the raider vessels fired something different, not a weapon designed to pierce armor, but something that burst against the hull in a wave of electromagnetic energy. The pulse weapon. Every light on the ship flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in after a moment, bathing everything in red. But the main system stayed dark. Navigation, weapons, life support, communications, all offline. And in the medical bay, every piece of advanced equipment went silent and dark. Dr. Velrus stood in the sudden darkness, illuminated only by emergency strips along the floor. Around him, holographic displays vanished like ghosts. The gentle hum of nanosurgical systems died. Diagnostic beds became simple platforms without their sensors. Every tool he had relied upon for his entire career was suddenly useless metal and plastic. The first casualties arrived within minutes. The raiders had breached the hull in 2 locations, and the ship's security forces were fighting to repel them. Crew members came stumbling or being carried into the medical bay with burns from energy weapons, shrapnel wounds from explosions, and injuries from hand-to-hand combat. They needed help immediately. Dr. Velrus looked at his dead equipment and felt panic rising in his chest. "I need power," he said to no one in particular. "I need the systems online." "I cannot work without the systems." Dr. Karras rushed to his side. her hands already moving to check on the wounded, but she stopped, realizing she didn't know what to do without the diagnostic beds to tell her what was wrong. She had spent one session learning the human methods. That wasn't enough. That wasn't nearly enough, Doctor. A Xanthari security officer lay on a gurney, blood flowing from a wound in his abdomen. Doctor, it hurts, please. Dr. Velrus opened his mouth, but no words came. His training had taught him to read displays, to interpret data, to trust the machines. But the machines were silent and he was helpless. Move. Hyunwoo appeared in the doorway, followed by two other humans. Corporal An Ji-won carried a large pack salvaged from the colony ship's supplies. Private Kang Yuna had her arms full of blankets and other basic materials. Both wore the same expression of grim determination as their team leader. Hyunwoo took one look at the situation and started giving orders. Ji-won set up a triage station by the entrance. Every casualty gets assessed before they come in. Yuna, start tearing those blankets into strips for bandages. We need as many as you can make. He turned to Dr. Karras. You remember what I taught you about checking vital signs? She nodded, her hands shaking. Then you're going to do it now. Check every patient. Tell me who needs help immediately and who can wait. But I've only practiced once. I might make mistakes. You'll definitely make mistakes if you just stand there doing nothing. Hyunwoo's voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Trust your training. Trust your hands. You can do this. More casualties arrived. The security forces were taking heavy losses. Every minute brought more wounded through the doors. Hyunwoo moved among them like he had done this 1,000 times before. He probably had. His hands checked wounds, assessed breathing, looked at pupil responses, all the things Dr. Karras had thought were primitive just days ago. Now she watched him work and saw not primitive methods but essential skills that needed no power, no computers, no technology at all. A Korvax engineer was carried in with a piece of metal embedded in her chest. Hyunwoo examined her quickly. Ji-won, she's priority 1. Get her on a table now. We can't operate, Dr. Velrus protested weakly. The plasma scalpels are offline. The tissue regenerators won't function. We don't have proper sterilization fields. Then we do it the old way. Hyunwoo was already pulling supplies from his pack. The same bottle of alcohol he had used before. More makeshift tools. Thread for sutures. Dr. Karras, I need you to assist. You're going to hold pressure while I remove the shrapnel. I don't know if I can. You're going to learn right now. He guided her hands to the wound. Press here. Not too hard, but firm and steady, feel that? You're controlling the bleeding with just your hands. That's medicine. The oldest kind and the most important kind. Dr. Karras pressed where he showed her and felt warm blood pulsing against her fingers. It was messy and terrifying and completely unlike anything she had done in her sterile, automated training. But she held steady because there was no other choice. Hyunwoo worked quickly, removing the shrapnel and closing the wound with careful sutures. No laser-perfect seals, no nano-repair systems, just thread and steady hands. The Korvax's vital signs stabilized. She would live. Around the medical bay, chaos transformed into organized urgency. Ji-won handled triage with the same practiced efficiency as her commander, assessing each patient and directing them to different areas based on severity. Critical cases went to Hyunwoo. Moderate injuries went to Yuna, who proved surprisingly skilled at wound care despite her young age. Minor cases were directed to a corner where they could receive basic first aid and wait for more serious injuries to be handled. Dr. Karras found herself moving between patients, using the skills Hyunwoo had taught her. Checking pulses, listening to breathing, looking for signs of shock or internal bleeding. It wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. But she was helping, and that was better than standing frozen and useless. A human crew member stumbled in, holding his arm. Captain Minho had sent him from the bridge with a message. They're trying to restart the main power systems, but it could take hours. The raiders are still trying to breach the command deck. Then we have hours to keep these people alive with what we have. Hyunwoo didn't look up from the patient he was treating. Tell the captain we'll manage. And they did manage. Hyunwoo converted a storage area into a makeshift operating room, using fire from a portable heater to sterilize instruments. He taught Dr. Karras how to set broken bones using metal rods as splints and torn cloth as padding. When they ran out of IV fluids, he showed them how to mix basic saline solution from the ship's water supply and stored salts. When suture thread ran low, Ji-won improvised with wire carefully cleaned and smoothed. Every solution was crude by galactic standards. But every solution worked. Dr. Velrus watched it all with growing amazement. These humans were practicing medicine as it had been done on countless worlds thousands of years ago. No computers, no nanotechnology, no plasma tools. Just knowledge, improvisation, and sheer determination to keep people alive. A young Xanthari with severe burns was brought in. Dr. Velrus looked at the wounds and felt despair. Without the tissue regenerators, these burns would scar permanently. The patient might not survive at all, but Hyunwoo didn't hesitate. He cleaned the wounds carefully, applied a basic antibacterial ointment from his medical supplies, and wrapped them in clean bandages. "The scarring will be severe," he admitted to the patient. "We can't prevent that without your technology, but you'll live to get proper treatment when the power comes back." "Living is enough," the Xanthari whispered. "Thank you." Hours passed. The fighting continued in other parts of the ship, but the medical bay became an island of focused purpose. The human medics worked without stopping, treating patient after patient with methods that would have seemed laughable in a fully powered facility. But here, in the darkness, with nothing but emergency lights and basic supplies, those ancient methods were the only things keeping people alive. Dr. Karras found herself standing beside Hyunwoo as he treated a security officer with a crushed leg. She held pressure on a bleeding artery while he worked to stabilize the limb with improvised splints. Her arms ached. Her hands were covered in blood. She had never been so exhausted in her life, but she had never felt more like a real doctor. "You were right," she said quietly, "about the technology making us dependent, about needing to know the basics. If you hadn't been here, someone else would have figured it out." Hyunwoo tied off the final splint and checked his work. "Necessity breeds innovation. Your people would have adapted eventually. Maybe. But many would have died first." She looked around at the makeshift field hospital, at the patients resting on simple pallets, at the crude but effective treatments keeping them stable. "We forgot something important. We forgot that medicine existed before machines. We forgot how to use our hands. Then it's time to remember." Hyunwoo stood and moved to the next patient, his movements tired but still precise. "Because machines will always fail eventually. But humans? We just keep going." The light suddenly flickered. Then slowly, systems began coming back online throughout the ship. The raiders had been repelled. Power was being restored. In the medical bay, diagnostic beds hummed back to life. Holographic displays materialized in the air. The advanced equipment that The conference room on the Sanctuary of Light had been converted into a classroom. Where holographic medical displays usually showed complex surgical procedures, there were now simple diagrams drawn on physical boards. Where automated teaching systems would have guided students through perfect simulations, there were training dummies made of synthetic materials that felt nothing like real flesh. And standing at the front of the room was Corporal Park Hyunwoo, looking distinctly uncomfortable with his new role as instructor. 12 alien medical staff members sat before him, including Dr. Velrus and Dr. Karras. They represented 5 different species, each with their own biological differences and medical traditions. Some had 3 fingers, others had 4 or 5. Some had hearing ranges that didn't overlap with human speech. Others had visual spectrums that made certain colors invisible to them. Teaching them human medical techniques was going to be a challenge. "I'm not a teacher," Hyunwoo said, starting his first formal lesson. "I'm a field medic. Everything I know comes from doing, not from teaching. So if I'm bad at this, just let me know and we'll figure it out together." Dr. Velrus made a note on his personal tablet. "On the contrary, Corporal, your practical experience is exactly what we need. Our medical education focuses heavily on theory and machine operation. We spend years learning to interpret data, but very little time actually touching patients. Then that's where we'll start." Hyunwoo gestured to Corporal An Ji-won, who stood beside him as his assistant instructor. "Touch, the most basic diagnostic tool in the universe. Every species in this room has some form of tactile sense. We're going to learn to use it properly." For the next hour, Hyunwoo taught them how to palpate for injuries, how to feel for broken bones beneath skin, how to detect swelling that indicated internal bleeding, how to assess temperature differences that suggested infection. It was frustrating work. The Thalok's fingers were too rigid. The Xanthari were too gentle and couldn't apply proper pressure. The Korvac's hands trembled from the unfamiliar precision required. Dr. Kara struggled more than most. Her species had evolved with extremely sensitive touch, which made them excellent at delicate surgical work, but terrible at the firm, confident examination Hyunwoo was teaching. Every time she pressed against the training dummy, she pulled back, afraid of causing damage. "You won't hurt it," Hyunwoo said patiently, "and in a real emergency, being too gentle is worse than being too rough. You need to be confident. Trust your hands to tell you what you need to know." "But what if I miss something?" Dr. Karras pressed against the dummy's abdomen again, trying to feel for the simulated injury hidden inside. "What if my assessment is wrong and the patient dies because I didn't feel the right thing?" "Then you did your best with the information you had." Hyunwoo's voice was firm but kind. "Look, I've been wrong before. Every medic has. But I've been wrong a lot more often when I hesitated and did nothing than when I took action based on my best judgment. Medicine isn't about being perfect. It's about giving the patient the best chance you can with what you have available." The lesson continued. Hyunwoo moved from student to student, adjusting their hand positions, showing them where to press and what to feel for. Private Kang Yuna demonstrated on a volunteer patient, showing how to check for spinal injuries through careful palpation. It was slow, painstaking work that required patience and repetition. Ensign Baek Sora, a human linguist who had joined the medical team as a translator, helped bridge communication gaps. She explained concepts in ways that made sense to different species, finding analogies that worked across vastly different cultural backgrounds. When Hyunwoo talked about listening to your gut instinct, she translated it to the Zenthari as trusting your pattern recognition systems. The meaning was the same, but the framing made it understandable. The second day focused on basic surgery without technology. Hyunwoo brought out real medical instruments, scalpels, clamps, sutures, all manual tools that required no power source. He showed them how to make clean incisions, how to control bleeding with pressure and clamps, how to close wounds with different suturing techniques. Dr. Velrus watched his hands with intense focus. The precision required is extraordinary. Without magnification systems, without stabilizing fields, one small mistake could be fatal. That's why you practice until your hands know what to do without thinking. Hyunwoo demonstrated a running suture on a piece of synthetic flesh. Muscle memory. Do it enough times and your hands work faster than your brain. That's crucial in emergencies when you don't have time to think through every step. But how many times is enough? Another doctor asked. How do we know when we've practiced sufficiently? Hyunwoo smiled slightly. You never stop practicing. Even experienced surgeons keep training because there's always room to improve. But you'll know you're ready when you can do it without panicking, when your hands stay steady even when your mind is screaming that everything is going wrong. They practiced on dummies, then on synthetic organs that Jiwon had constructed from available materials, then on deceased tissue samples that had been preserved for study. Each step brought them closer to the real thing, building confidence and skill through repetition. Dr. Karras proved to be a natural once she overcame her initial hesitation. Her sensitive touch made her excellent at finding exact locations for incisions. Her steady hands produced sutures that, while not as perfect as laser seals, were remarkably clean. She worked late into the night, practicing on dummy after dummy, determined to master these strange new skills. On the third day, Hyunwoo taught them about improvisation. You won't always have proper tools. Sometimes you'll need to make do with whatever you can find. That's when creativity becomes just as important as knowledge. He showed them how to create splints from broken furniture, how to make bandages from torn clothing, how to sterilize instruments using fire or alcohol when proper sterilization fields weren't available, how to create basic antiseptic solutions from common chemicals found on any ship. Every lesson focused on working with minimal resources, on being adaptable when circumstances weren't ideal. This seems like something we would never need, one doctor said. Our ships are well stocked with supplies. Why would we ever lack basic materials? Because life is unpredictable. Hyunwoo's expression turned serious. Ships crash. Supplies get contaminated. Equipment fails. War disrupts supply lines. Natural disasters destroy infrastructure. I've treated patients in collapsed buildings, in damaged shuttles in the middle of battlefields. I've done surgery with nothing but a pocket knife and a bottle of whiskey for sterilization. You hope you never need these skills, but when you do need them, you're grateful you have them. The fourth day brought their first real challenge. Officer Nam Taeyang, one of the ship's engineers, had been working in the engine room when a conduit exploded. He was brought to the medical bay with severe crush injuries to his chest and abdomen. The automated systems could handle it easily, but Dr. Velrus made a decision that surprised everyone. "Turn off the automated systems," he ordered. The other doctors stared at him in shock. "Doctor, this patient needs immediate care," one protested. We can't learn if we always rely on machines to save us." Dr. Velrus turned to Dr. Karras. "You've been training for 4 days. You've practiced the techniques. Now it's time to see if you can apply them under pressure. I want you to lead this surgery using only manual techniques. Corporal Park will supervise and advise, but you will be the primary surgeon." Dr. Karras felt her heart racing. This was insane. She had barely learned these skills. She wasn't ready for real surgery on a living patient. But she looked at Taeyang's pain-filled face and knew there was no choice. He needed help now. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt inside. Hyunwoo stood beside her as she prepared. "You know what to do. You've practiced this. Trust your training." Dr. Karras took a deep breath and picked up a scalpel. A real scalpel, not a plasma tool. Her hands shook slightly as she positioned it over Taeyang's chest. She could use the diagnostic beds to see where the damage was, but the repair work would all be manual. No tissue regenerators, no nano-repair systems, just her hands and the knowledge Hyunwoo had taught her. She made the first incision, clean and precise just as she had practiced. Blood welled up and she used manual suction to clear it away. Her hands moved with growing confidence as she located the source of internal bleeding, a ruptured vessel that needed to be clamped and sealed. "Good," Hyunwoo said quietly. "Now tie it off." Remember your knot technique. She did remember. Her fingers worked the suture thread, creating the secure knot that would hold the vessel closed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't as neat as a laser seal would have been. But it held. For the next hour, Dr. Karras worked through Taeyang's injuries one by one. She repaired damaged organs. She set broken ribs. She closed vessels and sutured torn tissue. Hyunwoo guided her when she hesitated, but she did most of the work herself. Finally, she stepped back. Taeyang's vital signs were stable. The immediate crisis was over. The automated systems could handle his recovery from here. She had done it. She had performed successful surgery using nothing but her hands and the skills a human medic had taught her. Dr. Velrus approached and examined her work. The Sanctuary of Light limped into port at Station Meridian 3 weeks after the Raider attack. The ship showed visible damage along its hull, scorch marks from energy weapons and patched breaches where the enemy had tried to force entry. But every crew member who had entered the medical bay during the crisis had walked out alive. That fact alone was remarkable enough to draw attention. What drew even more attention was the report Dr. Velrus submitted to the Galactic Health Authority. In his medical bay, using primitive manual techniques taught by a human medic, his staff had achieved a survival rate of 100% during a ship-wide emergency where all advanced systems had failed. In similar crises throughout galactic history, where medical technology had been disabled, average survival rates hovered around 60%. The difference was staggering enough that some officials immediately declared the report must contain errors, so they launched an investigation. 3 senior medical inspectors arrived at Station Meridian within days. They interviewed every doctor who had participated in the emergency response. They examined every patient who had been treated during the crisis. They reviewed recordings from the medical bay, watching in disbelief as humans performed surgery with simple metal tools and thread. They studied the improvised field hospital, the crude splints and bandages, the basic techniques that wouldn't have been out of place in a medical facility from 1,000 years ago, and they couldn't deny the results. The patients had survived. More than that, they had recovered well with minimal complications despite the primitive treatment methods. Chief Inspector Thane, a distinguished Korvax physician with 50 years of experience, sat across from Hyunwoo in a conference room. Explain to me how this is possible. How can methods that predate modern medical science produce better results than our most advanced technology? They don't produce better results, Hyunwoo corrected. Your technology is superior in every way when it's working. But when it fails, you need backup methods. We teach manual skills not because they're better than technology, but because they work when technology doesn't. But your survival rates exceeded what we would Expect even with functioning technology. That is because your doctors have forgotten how to read patients without machines. They've forgotten how to trust their own judgment. They hesitate because they're waiting for systems to tell them what to do. Hyunwoo leaned forward. Inspector, imagine you're treating a patient who's bleeding internally. Your scanner says the bleeding is in one location, but your hands tell you it's somewhere else. Who do you trust? The scanner, obviously. It provides objective data. And if the scanner is wrong, if it's malfunctioning or miscalibrated, how many patients die while you're running diagnostics to figure out why the machine is giving bad readings? Hyunwoo shook his head. I trust machines, but I trust my training more. Because training doesn't glitch. Experience doesn't need calibration. Knowledge doesn't shut down during an electromagnetic pulse. Inspector Thane was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, would you be willing to demonstrate these techniques for the Medical Academy Board? That's why I'm here, sir. The demonstration took place a week later at the Galactic Medical Academy on Station Meridian. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of doctors, medical students, and health officials from across known space. News of the Sanctuary of Light incident had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see the human who claimed primitive medicine could save lives better than advanced technology. Hyunwoo stood on a stage with his team beside him. Jiwon, Yuna, and Sora had all agreed to help with the presentation. Dr. Karras and several other doctors from the sanctuary also participated, ready to share what they had learned. Captain Minho stood at the back of the auditorium, watching his medic step into the spotlight. He felt proud and anxious in equal measure. This demonstration could change galactic medicine forever, or it could be dismissed as a novelty and forgotten within a week. Thank you for coming, Hyunwoo began, his voice amplified through the hall. I'm not here to say your medicine is wrong. Your technology saves lives every day in ways my species could only dream of 100 years ago. But I'm here to show you that old methods still have value, that manual skills can be the difference between life and death when systems fail. He gestured to Jiwon, who brought out a medical training dummy. This is how we train medics on Earth. No holographic simulations, no automated feedback. Just a dummy that feels approximately like real tissue, and an instructor who shows you what to do. You practice until your hands know the movements without thinking. You practice until you can work in the dark, in the cold and chaos, because emergencies don't wait for perfect conditions. For the next hour, Hyunwoo and his team demonstrated basic manual medical techniques. They showed patient assessment without diagnostic tools. They performed simulated surgery with simple instruments. They explained the principles of triage when resources were limited. They discussed improvisation when proper supplies weren't available. Dr. Karras spoke about her experience performing manual surgery on Officer Taeyang. I was terrified, she admitted to the audience. I had trained for only 4 days. But the patient needed help immediately, and I was the most qualified person available. So I did what I had been taught. I trusted my hands and my training, and it worked. She showed images of Taeyang's recovery. The sutures had left scars, visible lines across his chest where a tissue regenerator would have left perfect, unmarked skin. But he was alive and healthy, back to work in the engine room. The scars were a badge of honor now, proof that he had survived when technology failed. The audience reaction was mixed. Some doctors seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward to see the demonstrations more clearly. Others sat with crossed arms and skeptical expressions, clearly unconvinced that anything valuable could be learned from such primitive methods. During the question period, a Thalok surgeon stood. What you describe sounds more like emergency field medicine than actual surgical practice. Surely you're not suggesting we abandon our advanced tools in favor of knives and thread? Of course not, Hyunwoo replied. Use your advanced tools. They're incredible. But learn the manual skills as backup. Train in them regularly so you don't forget. Because ships crash. Power systems fail. Equipment breaks. And when that happens, patients still need help. Another doctor asked, how can we possibly train our staff in these techniques? Our medical education is already comprehensive. There's no room to add primitive skills training. Dr. Velrus stood to answer that question. Make room. Cut something less essential. Because I've seen what happens when trained doctors face an emergency without their technology. They freeze. They panic. They watch patients die because they don't know what to do with their own hands. His voice carried the weight of personal experience. I froze during the crisis on my ship. A young human medic saved lives I couldn't save. That humiliation taught me something valuable. Technology makes us powerful, but dependence on technology makes us weak. The debate continued for hours. Conservative voices argued for maintaining established practices. Progressive voices called for immediate integration of manual training into medical education. Compromises were suggested, pilot programs proposed, research studies demanded. Finally, Dr. Karras submitted her formal proposal to the Academy Board. She called it Adaptive Medicine, a comprehensive manual skills training program for modern medical practice. The document was thorough, well-researched, and built on solid data from the Sanctuary of Light incident. It proposed mandatory manual skills training for all medical students, regular practice requirements for licensed physicians, and the development of standardized teaching methods that could work across different species. The board retreated to deliberate. The audience waited in tense silence. When they returned, the head of the board spoke. After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from multiple sources, this board recognizes the value of manual medical skills as backup systems when technology fails. We hereby mandate that all accredited medical programs must include basic manual skills training in their curriculum. Specific requirements and standards will be developed over the coming months in consultation with experienced practitioners. The auditorium erupted. Half the audience applauded. The other half protested loudly. But the decision was made. Galactic medicine would change. In the chaos, Hyunwoo felt someone touch his shoulder. Inspector Thane stood beside him. The Academy would like to offer you a position as an instructor. You and your team. You'll help develop the training standards and teach the first generation of instructors who will spread this knowledge throughout the galaxy. Hyunwoo looked at Jiwon, Yuna, and Sora. They nodded, smiling. This was important work. This could save countless lives across hundreds of worlds. We accept, Hyunwoo said. On one condition. We bring Dr. Karras and the other doctors from the sanctuary as co-instructors. They understand both traditional galactic medicine and human manual techniques. They can bridge the gap better than we can alone. Agreed. Captain Minho approached as the crowd began to disperse. I'm losing my entire medical team. Sorry, sir. Hyunwoo smiled. But I think this is where we're needed most right now. I know. I'm proud of you. All of you.